The first thing I saw when I walked into my backyard was mud and silence. The kind of silence that feels like someone unplugged your whole life while you were gone. Then I smelled it, this faint sour rot riding on warm afternoon air, and I knew before my brain even caught up that something I loved had been hurt. And then Karen Miller, HOA president, stood right there on my flagstone path like she'd been waiting for applause. "You little fish were making the neighborhood look untidy, Mr. Davies," she said, "sweet as cheap syrup, so we simply tidied up." You ever hear a voice that's smiling while it's stabbing you? That was her. She was late 50s, plus-sized, poured into a pastel pink tracksuit like it was vacuum sealed on her body, arms crossed like she was the law. Her hair sprayed so stiff it looked like it could deflect rain. She had that expression, too smug satisfaction, like she'd just won something and couldn't wait for you to notice. Behind her was my sanctuary, or what used to be. 10 years, 10 of late nights, scraped knuckles, and careful patience. And now it was a muddy, gaping wound in the earth. My custom koi pond, 10,000 gallons, the centerpiece of my yard, empty, not low, not needs topping off, empty. The liner was cracked and drying like skin in the sun, and the filtration system, the overbuilt, beautiful filtration system I'd designed like my life depended on it, was choked with silt and laying there like a body on the battlefield. And my fish, my 15 prize koi, were dead. I'm not talking goldfish you win at a fair. I'm talking living jewels. Champion-grade Nishikigoi, certified, documented, raised and nurtured and watched, like you watch a kid grow up. One of them, my Jinrin Kohaku, had scales that shimmered like a handful of diamonds even in death. Another, a Showa I'd named Kenji, had these inky black patterns that had been developing since he was the size of my thumb. I'd watched those markings form over years like slow-motion art. Now they were just still. Pale bellies, limp fins, mud everywhere. I'd been gone 2 weeks with my wife Sarah visiting our daughter and our brand new grandson. That trip had been joy, pure joy, until I stepped into that backyard and it evaporated so fast it felt like a prank. 1 second I was Grandpa smiling, taking pictures, holding a tiny hand. The next I was staring at a massacre. The waterfall sound was gone. The hum of the pumps was gone. No soft splash, no white noise, no life, just dead quiet and that smell. And taped to my back door was a notice. Flimsy paper curling at the edges in the sun like it knew it didn't belong. Violation notice dated 3 days earlier, citing some rule that didn't exist, something about unaesthetic water features, declaring an emergency abatement action. Signed with a big dramatic flourish by Karen Miller. Like she was autographing a souvenir. Now she stood there across from me, and my hands were clenched so hard I could feel my nails biting into my palms. I did 25 years in the Marine Corps, logistics and engineering. Iraq, Okinawa, places where you learn real fast that losing your temper doesn't fix anything. It just creates extra problems you'll have to solve later. The Corps taught me control, how to take anger and compress it into strategy. But standing there looking at my dead koi, then looking at Karen's satisfied little smirk, my control felt like a thread stretched thin over a fire. "You drained my pond," I said, and my voice came out low, dangerously low. "You came onto my property while I was away. You trespassed, you destroyed my equipment, and you killed my fish." Karen shrugged, just shrugged. A theatrical little flick of her shoulders like she was brushing lint off a sweater. "The bylaws are quite clear, Mr. Davies," she said, and she added my name like it tasted sour. "The Architectural Control Committee has broad discretion to maintain community standards. We received a complaint." That was a lie. The complaint was her. It was always her. "An eyesore," I repeated, and the word tasted like ash. Those were champion koi, each one certified, each one with a pedigree longer than your entire HOA charter. That wasn't an untidy feature. That was a collection worth over $250,000. For just a second, just a flicker, something crossed her face. Not remorse, nothing human like that. More like math. Financial panic trying to surface before she shoved it back down. She laughed, short, barking, mean. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she said. "They're just fish. You can buy more at the pet store." Then she leaned in a little like she was sharing a secret. "And you'll be receiving a bill for the abatement service? And a fine for the unapproved and now damaged pond liner. I suggest you take care of it promptly." And then, like a queen finishing her speech, she turned to leave. That moment, that was when the rage inside me changed temperature. Hot rage is messy. It makes you yell. It makes you do stupid things. It makes you say something you can't take back. But cold rage is clean, it's quiet, it's purpose. She had destroyed my property, murdered my fish, and now she was going to bill me for the privilege. The gall of it was almost impressive in this twisted way, like watching someone rob your house and then hand you an invoice for the crowbar. Karen thought she'd just swatted a fly. What she didn't know was she'd just declared war on someone who'd spent a lifetime dismantling complex problems piece by piece systematically until there was nothing left to fight with. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about justice. I didn't chase her down the path. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten. I just stood there staring at my ruined pond, listening to her footsteps fade. And I started thinking the way I always think when something goes sideways. Recon, evidence, procedure, leverage. That night, Sarah found me sitting on the edge of the dead pond with a thick binder in my lap. The sun was down, shadows stretched across the yard like long fingers. She didn't lecture me. She didn't ask me to calm down. She just wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, sat beside me, and whispered, "I'm sorry, Jack." I nodded and I turned a page. That binder was my koi journal. Inside were certificates of authenticity from breeders in Japan, lineage charts, growth records, weekly water test logs, photos of each fish from the day I brought it home. 15 fish, 15 stories, 15 files thick with proof that these weren't just fish. 6 months earlier, for insurance purposes, a certified specialist had appraised the whole collection at $278,500. Sarah watched my hands as they moved over the pages, and she said softly, "What are you going to do?" I didn't look up. She said, "They're just fish," I murmured. "She's going to learn otherwise." The first step in any operation is to document the battlefield. For 2 days, I worked with meticulous, almost surgical calm. I took over 1,000 high-resolution photos from every angle. The empty pond, the cracked liner, the silt jammed into the filtration pipes from the sudden drain, the pump motor burned out from running dry. I laid the dead koi on a white tarp, measured them, photographed their markings, like I was logging evidence in an after-action report. I took video too, walking the perimeter, narrating the damage in a steady voice, because I knew later when emotions ran high that calm footage would matter. I bagged and tagged each fish individually, yes, like evidence, and placed them in a large chest freezer in my garage. Grim but necessary. If you've never had to preserve evidence against someone who's already lying, you might not get it, but I wasn't giving Karen a single inch of wiggle room. Then I pulled out the thick file I kept on the Oakwood Creek Estates Homeowners Association. Years ago, when the development first sprang up, they'd tried to absorb my property. I fought it. I really did. But a slick developer and a team of lawyers found a loophole in an old county zoning ordinance, and my land got annexed into the HOA's domain on paper. I'd paid the dues under protest ever since, mostly ignoring them, and they'd mostly ignored me. Until Karen. I spread the CC and Rs across my dining room table, covenants, conditions, restrictions, a masterpiece of deliberately confusing legal language designed to hand power to the right people and confusion to everyone else. I read every word, highlighted, annotated, cross-referenced like it was a mission briefing. Karen had pointed to a section under the Architectural Control Committee, something about addressing features that are aesthetically unpleasing or pose a health hazard like stagnant water. Sure, fine. That's the kind of vague nonsense HOAs love. But 3 sections down in Article 11, it spelled out process in plain terms. Any abatement action required a 30-day written notice delivered by certified mail, a majority vote of the board documented in official minutes, and any action costing over $500 required 3 competitive bids. Karen had done none of it. The notice she tacked to my door was a fake version of authority, like a kid wearing their dad's badge. She hadn't just overstepped, she'd sprinted miles outside her own rules. And then I saw the name on the abatement bill she'd promised. Karen's Clean Cut Landscaping. Cute. I looked it up in state business records. And sure enough, it wasn't even hers. Owner Gary Slater. That name rang a bell in the worst way. I dug out Sarah's old neighborhood directory, flipped pages, and there it was. Gary Slater, married to Karen Miller's sister. So it wasn't just abuse of power. It was corrupt. She'd used HOA authority, and likely HOA money, to hire her brother-in-law to trespass on my property and destroy a $250,000 asset. That's not oops. That's not I misunderstood a rule. That's a scheme. My first move wasn't a furious phone call. It wasn't a shouting match in the street. It was registered mail. I drafted a formal letter to the HOA Board of Directors addressed care of Karen Miller. Cold, factual, dates, times, violations cited by article and section number, no emotional language, just a clean, undeniable statement of what happened. and what procedures they failed to follow. I demanded a written explanation and a copy of the official minutes where this emergency abatement had supposedly been approved. And I didn't send one copy. I sent 5. One to the HOA's official address and one to the home of every board member. I wanted to isolate Karen from her little palace guard. I wanted those other board members, Gerald the accountant, the retired gym teacher, the stay-at-home mom, to feel the heat directly. No hiding behind, we didn't know. 2 weeks passed. Silence. Then, like she was proud of herself, the HOA sent exactly what Karen promised. A bill for $1,200 from Karen's clean-cut landscaping for pond decommissioning and debris removal, plus a formal fine of $500 for failure to maintain property because my backyard now had a gaping hole where my pond used to be. I stared at that paper and I actually laughed, one dry, humorless little laugh, because it was so absurd it circled back around to funny. Like, imagine someone keys your car and then leaves a note saying, "You also owe me for the key." Finally, a response arrived from the HOA's lawyer, some cut-rate firm that made their money defending petty tyrants like Karen. The letter was pure deflection. It claimed the board had deemed my pond a clear and present danger due to reports of foul odors and mosquito infestation, invoking an emergency health hazard clause that supposedly superseded the 30-day notice rule. Complete fabrication. My pond had moving water. Mosquitoes don't breed in moving water. And the only smell in that part of my yard came from the jasmine Sarah planted near the fence line. The letter also said my claims about valuable fish were unsubstantiated and implied I was trying to intimidate the board. They denied responsibility, demanded payment of the bill, and fine within 30 days, and threatened interest if I didn't comply. It was signed by the board, but I could feel Karen's fingerprints all over it. And tucked in the envelope, because she just couldn't help herself, was a brand new violation notice. This one was for the chest freezer in my garage. A neighbor, she claimed, had reported an unapproved industrial appliance visible from the street. My garage door had been open 10 minutes while I loaded trash bags, and Karen had used that sliver of time to try and force me to get rid of the freezer. The freezer holding the bodies of my koi. The evidence. That was the moment the campaign shifted from defense to offense. Because now it wasn't just that she'd hurt me. She was actively trying to erase the proof. I picked up the phone and called a number I hadn't dialed in years. "Dave," I said when he answered. "It's Jack Davies." "Yeah, it's been a while. Listen, I've got a situation. I need a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. I need a Marine." Dave Reynolds had been a JAG officer in my unit. Sharp. Aggressive. The kind of guy who could smell a bully from a mile away and actually enjoyed the process of putting them in their place. When I laid it out, there was a pause on the line. A long one. Then he said with this slow smile in his voice, "Let me get this straight. The HOA president trespassed, hired her brother-in-law to destroy your custom pond, killed a school of swimming Ferraris. And now she's fining you for the damage she caused, and for the freezer storing the evidence." "Yes," I said. "And she put it in writing." "Yes," Dave exhaled. "Jack, this isn't a legal problem. This is a gift. Send me everything." And just like that, the fire was lit. Dave's role was legal artillery. My role was field commander, gathering intel, building leverage, and finding allies. Because a campaign like this doesn't work if it's just one guy yelling into the void. Karen's kind of power hunger doesn't stop at one victim. It spreads. It feeds on people who feel alone. So I went door to door, not angry, not ranting. I put on a friendly face, clipboard in hand, a plate of Sarah's oatmeal cookies, like I was running for office. I wasn't the guy with the dead fish. I was a neighbor doing a community survey. First stop was Mrs. Gable, an elderly widow 2 doors down. Her yard was bright and whimsical, full of flowers and little decorations. As I walked up, I saw her hurriedly tucking a small ceramic gnome behind a rose bush like she'd been caught shoplifting. "Just making sure everything is up to code," she said nervously. "Mrs. Miller doesn't like the gnomes." I softened my voice. "Mrs. Gable, I'm not here about your gnomes. I'm here because of what she did to my pond." When I told her, her eyes widened and then the words just poured out. Karen had been waging a war of attrition against her for months, violation notices, fine after fine for unapproved statuary. It started at $25, climbed, and now she was paying $100 a month for a gnome. $100 a month is groceries to someone on a fixed income. It's medicine. It's peace. Mrs. Gable looked terrified. "I'm scared they'll put a lien on my home," she whispered. I asked for copies. I wrote everything down. And I told her, "You're not alone." Next, I visited the Rodriguez family across the street from Karen. 2 boys. I'd seen them playing basketball in the driveway. Mr. Rodriguez answered the door and didn't even let me start. Let me guess, he said, glancing at the clipboard. The basketball hoop. Karen had been trying to get it removed, calling it an attractive nuisance, claiming the sound of the ball violated the noise ordinance in the middle of the day. She'd fined them repeatedly, threatened to lean. I work 60 hours a week to afford this place for my kids, he said, voice thick with anger. And this woman is trying to stop my boys from being boys. What are we supposed to do, keep them inside all day? I listened. I documented. With his permission, I recorded his statement. Because patterns matter, and so do voices. By the end of the week, I'd talked to a dozen homeowners. Wrong shade of white trim, trash cans out too long, kids' toys left on the lawn for an hour, a satellite dish 6 inches too large. Everybody afraid. Everybody isolated. Everybody thinking they were the only target. Then Mike Tanaka called me. Mike was a former Marine intelligence analyst, quiet, unassuming, and the kind of guy who could pull a needle out of a digital haystack without breaking a sweat. He ran a private investigation firm now. When I told him I needed help digging into an HOA president, he chuckled. Jack, he said, that's not intel work. That's just Tuesday. Give me 48 hours. 2 days later, he called back with a bingo so satisfied I could practically hear him smiling. Your HOA president isn't just a bully, he said. She's a grifter. Karen's Clean Cut Landscaping has been the exclusive vendor for community grounds maintenance for 3 years, ever since she became president. No bids, just contracts. And the billing is insane, $8,000 a month for basic mowing and hedge trimming. That should cost half. Over 3 years, Mike estimated she'd funneled over $100,000 in inflated contracts to her brother-in-law. But then he lowered his voice. And there's more. I cross-referenced HOA payments to the company, and I found regular monthly payments from Gary Slater's personal account to a private account belonging to Karen Miller labeled consulting fee. Kickbacks, not just conflict of interest. Embezzlement, wire fraud, criminal behavior. I hung up and stared at my dining room table covered in evidence photos of my dead koi. Mrs. Gable's fine letters, the Rodriguez threats, and Mike's report like a match waiting for gasoline. Karen thought she was playing checkers. She had no idea I was about to hit her from 3 directions at once. Dave and I drafted a formal demand letter on his firm's letterhead. 20 pages of precision. We dismantled their health hazard excuse before it could breathe statements, documentation, expert references. We didn't leave anything vague. Then we laid out damages. We attached the certified appraisal, $278,500 for the koi. We attached 3 independent quotes for pond restoration. The lowest was $48,000 liner stonework repair, new filtration pump system. We included investigation costs and a preliminary estimate of legal fees. Total demand $355,000. But the real genius wasn't the number. It was the settlement offer. Because Dave understood Karen's ego was her weakness. We offered a reduced settlement covering direct restoration and replacement, with 2 conditions: a full public admission and apology from Karen to be read aloud at the next HOA meeting, and the immediate termination of the landscaping contract replaced by transparent competitive bidding. Dave called it the ego trap. She'll never do it, he said. Admitting she's wrong is kryptonite to a narcissist. She'll refuse, and it'll make her look unreasonable later. And he was right. While we waited, I went back to the neighbors, not just with my story, but with their story. I showed them the math. The overbilling didn't just hurt me. It was coming out of their dues, their money, their community. The fear started turning into anger, and then into resolve. People started talking, sharing, comparing notices, realizing Karen's power worked because she kept everyone apart. 2 weeks later, her response arrived, arrogant, dismissive, exactly what we wanted. Her lawyer called our demand extortionate, our koi valuation laughably fraudulent, and our apology condition an insulting stunt. Flat refusal. But then she handed us our next weapon. She announced a special HOA meeting in 10 days, with a single agenda item voting on a bylaw amendment to clarify and strengthen the committee's authority, including an explicit prohibition on ponds over 500 gallons. She was trying to rewrite the rules after the fact to justify what she'd already done. It was a fatal miscalculation, because she just dragged her crimes into a room full of witnesses. We formed a group and oversight committee, just neighbors banding together. I organized them the way I'd organize any operation roles, evidence packets, strategic placement in the room. No chaos, no scattered shouting, disciplined, informed pressure. The night of the meeting, the community center was packed. Over 100 homeowners showed up, record attendance. Not for stale cookies, not for weak coffee, for a reckoning. Karen sat at the head table with her board members smiling like the turnout was proof of her greatness. She tapped her little gavel like she was running a courtroom. "Welcome, everyone," she began, dripping with condescension. It's wonderful to see so many of you taking an active interest in protecting our community's beauty and property values." Then she launched into a speech disguised as a tirade against unapproved modifications, against eyesores, against the idea that people might live like actual humans in a neighborhood. Without saying my name, she referenced a recent unfortunate incident involving a hazardous stagnant pond as proof her amendment was necessary. When she finished, she asked for a motion to vote. And that's when I stood up. "Point of order, Madam President," I said, calm, steady, loud enough to carry across the room. Her eyes narrowed. "This is not the time for public comment. We are here to vote." According to Robert's Rules of Order, I said, holding up the bylaws, discussion and debate are required before a vote on an amendment. Our bylaws state we must follow those rules. I wish to discuss the proposal. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Karen's jaw tightened. She was trapped by the exact procedures she loved using as a weapon. With a tight smile that looked painful, she gestured for me to proceed. She expected an emotional rant about my fish. What she got was a presentation. I walked to the front, plugged in my laptop, and faced the room. "Mrs. Miller is right about one thing," I said. "We do need to talk about enforcement. But this amendment isn't the real issue. The real issue is the abuse of power, how our current rules are being used to harass and intimidate neighbors." The first image hit the screen: Mrs. Gable's house, with a bright red circle around a tiny garden gnome. "This," I said, "is a violation. Mrs. Gable has been fined over $400 because of this gnome." Next slide: Rodriguez driveway, basketball hoop. "This," I said, "is a nuisance according to our president. The Rodriguez family has been threatened with a lien because their kids play basketball after school." Slide after slide. Wrong paint shade, trash can timing, toys, minor things turned into weapons. The room got quieter with each image because people were seeing their own private stress displayed publicly and realizing they weren't crazy. They weren't alone. Then I paused. "And where does all this money go?" I asked. "Where do our dues go? We're told it funds community maintenance like landscaping." Next slide: Karen's clean-cut landscaping. "For 3 years," I said, "this company has had an exclusive no-bid contract awarded by our president. It costs us over $90,000 a year." I clicked again. 2 documents side by side. State business registration showing owner Gary Slater, and a local society page photo showing Karen and her sister. Caption identifying her sister as Mrs. Gary Slater. A gasp rippled through the room, real physical shock. "The president," I said, "has been funneling our money to her own brother-in-law at nearly double market rates." Our committee members stood up and started passing copies of invoices and analysis through the rows. People grabbed the papers like they were oxygen. "This isn't about a pond," I said, voice firm. "This is about cronyism, self-dealing, and financial mismanagement. And this amendment isn't to protect property values. It's to give her more power, more excuses to levy fines, and to retroactively justify the illegal destruction of my private property carried out by her brother-in-law's company." The room erupted. Questions shouted, accusations, papers waved. The board members looked pale, staring at Karen like they'd just realized what they'd been sitting next to. The vote was forgotten. The meeting became a tribunal. Cornered and exposed, Karen did exactly what Dave predicted. She self-destructed. Her face went blotchy red. The calm bureaucrat mask cracked and fell away, revealing the sputtering rage underneath. She grabbed the microphone with white knuckles. "Lies," she shrieked. "This is a coordinated attack. Mr. Davies is a bully. He's forged documents to slander me because he's angry about his stupid dirty pond." The room went stunned quiet again. Not because they believed her, but because they were watching her unravel in real time. And you could hear phones recording little clicks, little buzzes, people capturing the moment. Karen kept going wild-eyed now. "That pond was a disgrace," she raged. "It was smelly, full of bugs, a mosquito-infested swamp. I did this community a favor by getting rid of it. The bylaws gave me all the authority I needed, and I would do it again." There it was. The confession. Public, clear, unambiguous. Delivered into a room full of witnesses and recording devices. And then she made her second fatal mistake. She went after me, personally accusing me of threats and extortion, flinging words like she could drown the truth in noise. That's when Dave Reynolds stood up from the back of the room. Sharp suit, calm posture, that look in his eyes like he'd been waiting for exactly this moment. "Madam President," he said, voice cutting clean through her chaos. "My name is David Reynolds. I am legal counsel for Mr. Jack Davies. I believe several dozen people in this room have just recorded you admitting to the willful destruction of my client's private property." Karen froze, like a dog that just heard the leash snap. Dave walked toward the head table, slow and steady, opening a leather briefcase. "You have also," he continued, "made multiple defamatory statements accusing my client of forgery, extortion, and threats. Those allegations are demonstrably false. He reached the table, pulled out 2 thick documents, and placed them in front of her like the final cards in a hand. "Karen Miller," he said, voice ringing, "on behalf of my client, you are hereby served. First paper civil lawsuit for $355,000 plus punitive damages for malicious intent. Second paper defamation." Karen stared at the documents like they were snakes. The color drained from her face. Her mouth opened, and nothing came out. The other board members leaned away from her like she was radioactive. The room didn't cheer, not exactly. It was more like the air released from a balloon. Relief. Vindication. That deep, quiet satisfaction of watching someone finally hit the wall they'd been running from. Gerald, the accountant, cleared his throat and addressed the room, not Karen. I believe we need a motion," he stammered, "to adjourn and schedule an emergency executive session immediately." Seconded. Passed. Unanimous. Karen didn't even vote. She just sat there staring at the papers that represented the smoldering ruins of her little kingdom. As people filed out, neighbors stopped to shake my hand, clap my shoulder. Mrs. Gable hugged me with tears in her eyes. Mr. Rodriguez gripped my arm and said simply, "Thank you. You gave us our neighborhood back." And right there, standing in that crowded room, I realized something that hit harder than any fine letter ever could. I came for justice for my fish, but what we really won was community. We broke the fever Karen had spread, the fear, the isolation, the whispering behind curtains. We reminded ourselves we weren't just separate houses, we were neighbors. After that meeting, everything happened fast. Videos of Karen's meltdown spread across local social pages within a day. Someone edited a clip that cut between her screaming, "I would do it again," and photos of my koi alive, then dead. Brutal, effective. Narrative warfare, clean and simple. Local news picked it up. A reporter called me. I agreed, but only if he interviewed other homeowners too. The segment was devastating. Me beside my ruined pond, calm, factual. Mrs. Gable speaking with quiet dignity about gnome fines. Mr. Rodriguez defending his kid's right to play. And then the reporter laid out the financial allegations. Self-dealing, inflated invoices, kickbacks. The station even tried getting a comment from the HOA's lawyer, who could only sputter no comment. But the soundbite that stuck, the one that made Karen's stomach drop every time she heard it, was her own voice screaming into that microphone. The consequences weren't just social. They were legal. The HOA had directors and officers insurance D&O meant to protect board members. But those policies almost always exclude fraud, criminal misconduct, willful, malicious acts. Karen's confession was basically a neon sign pointing at that exclusion. Dave got a call from the insurance carrier. They told him they'd cover the HOA's liability for the property damage claim because the board acted negligently, letting Karen run wild, but they were denying coverage for Karen personally. Willful and malicious. Fraud. Kickbacks. She was on her own. That was the moment the other board members finally understood Karen wasn't just embarrassing. She was dangerous to them financially. They held an emergency meeting without her. First vote, remove Karen as president and board member effective immediately. Second, fire their old lawyer. Third, hire competent counsel and start settlement negotiations. Meanwhile, our oversight committee filed a recall petition, symbolic at that point, but important. We gathered the signatures in one afternoon. People were practically lining up to sign. The civil suit for the pond settled quickly. The HOA's insurance wanted it gone. They agreed to pay the full pond restoration and the appraised value of the koi. When the check arrived, $326,500 made out to me, it felt like vindication. And also hollow. Money doesn't bring back a kohaku you watched grow for years. It doesn't bring back the quiet mornings by the pond, coffee in hand, watching those fish glide like living brushstrokes. But justice isn't always about replacing what was lost. Sometimes it's about making sure the person who broke it doesn't get to keep smiling. Karen, stripped of title power and insurance coverage, faced the defamation suit alone. She tried to countersue, claiming I orchestrated a smear campaign. The court didn't laugh out loud, but it might as well have. Her case died fast. Legal bills piled up. She couldn't hide behind HOA funds anymore. She was forced to put her house on the market. And then we hit the criminal angle. Mike packaged everything, kickback-proof invoices, bank records, wire transfers into a neat file that practically had prosecution stamped on it. I walked into the district attorney's office, handed it over, and gave my statement. And I'll tell you something. Watching the gears of a bigger machine start turning is a different kind of satisfaction. Quieter. Heavier, like hearing a lock click shut somewhere far away. Months passed. The pond rebuild began. I hired the best pond construction company in the state. They excavated the old liner, regraded the shelves and contours with expert precision. They laid a new commercial-grade EPDM liner, smooth black, clean and strong like a promise. They installed a cutting-edge filtration system, upgraded pump, UV clarifier, fail-safe, overflows, automated water changes. It wasn't just rebuilt. It was better. While my yard was healing, the neighborhood was healing too. Mr. Rodriguez, newly energized, helped lead the committee into a special election. We swept the board. The last remnants of Karen's regime got shoved out the door. The new board rewrote the bylaws with a property lawyer, clear objective standards, transparent multi-bid process for contracts, fines revised to correct, not punish. Mrs. Gable got a formal apology. Her garden didn't just get one gnome back, it got a whole proud family of them standing there like little ceramic middle fingers to fear. And the neighborhood used some of the money that wasn't being siphoned off anymore to install a brand new basketball court in the community park. You know what that sounded like? Freedom. Bouncing balls. Kids laughing. That sound Karen tried to outlaw became the soundtrack of our neighborhood. The day the pond was finally filled again was quiet. No ceremony, just Sarah and me standing there as water rose clean and clear. The waterfall turned on and that gentle cascade came back like a familiar voice returning after a long absence. The system hummed. The air felt lighter. A few days later, a specialized truck arrived from a koi breeder in California. This part I wrestled with. Because you can't replace history. You can't replace names and routines and the way Kenji used to surface when I walked out with food like he recognized my footsteps. So I didn't try to replace them. Instead of mature champions, I bought young koi 1-year-olds with high potential. Toei, a new generation, a new beginning. I watched the breeder float the bags to acclimate them, watched flashes of red and black and metallic sheen shift under plastic. They weren't replacements. They were successors. A week later, I sat on my new teak bench watching those young koi explore their new home. When a moving van pulled up to Karen's house across the street, I didn't go outside to gloat. I didn't wave. I just watched. Movers carried boxes out. Furniture. Pieces of a life she'd built on control. When she finally emerged, she looked smaller, diminished, like the bluster had been drained out of her the way she drained my pond. She got into her car, the same car she drove the day she came to gloat, and pulled out. As she passed my house, she slowed. Our eyes met through the glass. Her face held resentment, bitterness, and something else to defeat. The kind that sticks. I didn't smile. I didn't smirk. I just held her gaze and gave a single slow nod. Not I win. More like, it's done. She looked away, first hit the gas, and disappeared down the street, out of the neighborhood she once ruled, and out of my life. Later, Dave told me she pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor fraud charge to avoid a heavier conviction. Probation. Restitution to the HOA. The defamation suit settled out of court for enough money that she'd be paying for a long time. And when I heard that, I didn't feel triumph the way people imagine it. I felt quiet. Because here's the moral that hit me hard when everything finally slowed down. Power doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears a pink tracksuit and holds a stack of rules like a weapon. And the scariest part is how easily people let it happen. Not because they agree, but because they feel alone. Fear makes you small. Isolation makes you obedient. But the moment you document the truth, the moment you connect with other people, the moment you stop letting bullies fight you one at a time, their power starts collapsing under its own weight. That's what Karen never understood. She thought rules were armor. Turns out rules are also a blade when you know how to hold them. Now when I sit by that pond and the sun glints off the water, I watch those new koi glide in slow, graceful circles. One little Jin Shigoi friendly breed, bold as anything, swims right up to the edge, mouth open like it's asking for food, and I can't help it. I smile. A real smile. The first one I felt in months. It started with destruction. It became a war of paper procedure and public truth. And it ended with something I didn't expect, peace. So let me ask you something, because I know if you've ever dealt with an HOA bully, this is going to hit a nerve. Where's the line between community standards and straight-up abuse of power? And what do you think people should do when that line gets crossed? Tell me in the comments, have you ever had a Karen in your neighborhood, someone who hid behind rules to hurt people? And if you did, how did you handle it?